All right. Well, thanks for coming to the UW Biotechnology Center's Biotech Talks today. I'm Tom Zinnan. I'm going to be the presenter. I'd like to thank Liz Jesse for inviting me to give this talk. Next month, on February 16th, the topic will be DNA sequencing. The facilitator will be Molly Zeller from the DNA sequencing labs here, and the title is to be announced. On April 20th, the guest speaker will be Lisa Pinnell of BioLegend. She's a technical application scientist. And the facilitator is Sandra Splinter-Bondurant. And then on May 18th, we'll be talking about animal models with the UWBC facilitator being Kathy Krentz, who directs the Animal Models Core here at the Biotech Center. So that's what's coming up on UW Biotech Center Biotech Talks. Thanks for coming today. I'm Tom Zinnan. I work here with Liz Jesse in the Public Outreach Program of the Biotechnology Center. We call it BioTrek, the Public Outreach Program. Liz and I are both state specialists with Wisconsin 4-H, which is part of the Division of Extension, and that's the statewide youth development program of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We'll be talking a little bit about that in the context of the Xenos paradox and the futures of science outreach. So first of all, Xenos paradox is the original, and this is named for a Greek philosopher named Xenos. He had a whole bunch of paradoxes, and one of them was if you want to go from here to here, and the original paradox was the famous person Atalanta and the person who had the golden apples. In order to go from here to here, you got to go halfway. In order to go halfway, you got to go quarter way. If you go quarter way, you got to go eighth way, etc. And that was an infinite series of places that you had to go through. And from Xenos's point of view, that was a logical paradox, a contradiction. There's no way that you could get from here because you got an infinite number of places to go through. That was the original Xenos paradox. For me, there's this Xenos paradox. And Xenos is a pretty cool word from ancient Greek that can mean foreigner or stranger or visitor or guest. And for me, the Xenos paradox in science outreach, especially for public land grant research universities such as UW-Madison, the Xenos paradox is, how are we going to view the public? Are we going to view them as foreigners to shy away, guests to accommodate, visitors to accommodate, or guests to welcome and engage? So whether we look at the public as strangers or as visitors or as guests, that's a big deal, because that's how we're going to position ourselves. That's how we're going to project ourselves to the public. And why is that important? Well, when Liz and I have groups of grade school kids come to this building, which I want to invite anybody who wants to come for a field trip, get a hold of us at biotrek.wisc.edu, and we'd be happy to set that up. When we have groups come here, I ask the 4th and 5th graders, so who owns the University of Wisconsin system and UW-Madison? It's very interesting to hear 4th and 5th graders or 9th and 10th graders struggle to answer that question. I eventually get to the point where I can say, well, there are about 5.9 million co-owners, because this is a public place and it's co-owned by the 5.9 million residents of Wisconsin. And I make that claim because that was the frame that Charles Van Hise put to the state legislature in his February 15th, 1905 speech to the legislature, in which he articulated my favorite version of the Wisconsin idea, which is, I shall never be content until the beneficent influence of the university reaches every family of the state. So not only do we have 5.9 million co-owners, I asked the 4th and 5th graders, are you taxpayers? And they go, no, I'm not, my parents sure are, but I'm not a taxpayer. But then if I ask them, well, if you go to the store to buy a $2 Snickers bar, how much more do you have to leave at the store than just $2? Oh, they have to leave like $2.11 total. So this is the powerful thing about the sales tax. This makes almost all of us, anybody who buys candy, clothes, computers with their own money, that makes you a co-funder of this place. And by virtue of being a co-owner and a co-funder, one of the challenges, one of the opportunities is to ask, how can I be a good steward? What's it mean to be a good steward of a public resource, such as the public university system and including UW-Madison? So how are we going to view these folks who are strangers, visitors, or guests? At a public university, they're also co-owners. If you work at a private university, you don't have that quite so much. If you work at a public university that isn't a land grant, you still have that positioning. But the unusual thing about the land grants is that we have a specific mission and duty and obligation to engage the public in the extension mission. So this whole idea of being able to engage the public in places of higher education goes pretty far back. I don't know what the first examples are, but the first ones that I'm aware of are Aristotle and the Lyceum. When Aristotle set up the Lyceum because he didn't get chosen to follow on Plato after Plato died and he didn't get to run the academy, he set up his own place in Athens. And one of the things the Lyceum did was to provide public lectures every day, not just for the students at the Lyceum, but for anybody who wanted to come by. There's another place that's a favorite of mine, which is called Gresham College in London in the UK, which was founded in 1597. If you ever heard of Gresham's Law about good money driving out bad, that's the same person. And when he died, he endowed this Gresham College. And one of the cool things that they do is they provide free public lectures in the liberal arts plus divinity in English. And so that's a big deal, is the transition from higher education, which in the Middle Age was primarily in Latin and Greek, to vernacular languages that anybody could understand. Also in London is the Royal Institution, which is famous for the Christmas lectures that began in the 1820s. In the United States, possibly other places, there were two movements in the 19th century that I looked to. One was the Athenaeum movement, and the other was the Chautauqua movement, both of which had to do with how do people who have little schooling advance their learning in informal ways in communities when it was pretty hard to get around. So people are familiar with the idea of traveling circuses, but there were also traveling educational entities such as the Chautauqua and fixed places like the Athenaeum. From an agricultural point of view, there was the Grange movement founded in 1867. Here in Wisconsin, we had Hoard's Dairyman, which is a publication started in 1885, but it was a way for people to share their own insights. And as the university got better at doing research, some of this was university research. The university here launched a farm short course in January of 1886. It ran for 3 months, January to March, and it was the dominant teaching function of the university's College of Agriculture for a long time. So a little bit of a case study here of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which originally was called the University of Wisconsin. It was founded with income from lands granted by the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So this is a big deal because one of the questions about the future is also one really key to the past, and that is who funds, with what kind of money, how reliably, for doing the missions of the university. And the 3 missions of the university currently, the canonical ones, are instruction, research, and outreach, public engagement, public service. So this university was founded, as were several other universities that were in states formed out of what was called the Northwest Territories, with federal lands the federal government had taken from the Indians, gotten the title to or claimed the title to, and then they distributed those to lands to states, and then the states could either rent those or sell them, and the proceeds went into a trust fund that still exists today and helps fund the university. In 1866, University of Wisconsin was designated by the state of Wisconsin as the land grant university for Wisconsin, and that's from the 1862 Morrill Land Grant Act. So that's the one that said we're going to be, among other things, a college where you can come and study agriculture and mechanic arts, as well as the classical and liberal arts. For context, here we are 30 years after the university started. I've been at the university 31 years. So if you look at this, this is about my entire lifetime here at the university from 1848 to 1878. The UW had 425 students. They graduated 40 that year, and only one was graduated in agriculture. A few years later, in 1883, the Wisconsin Agricultural Research Station, or Experiment Station, was launched, and that was 4 years before the United States Hatch Act, which is a second big act, because that one provided not land grants, but cash. Federal money year after year after year to support primarily research, but there's also some components of sharing research and doing joint projects with farmers in that. That same year, T.C. Chamberlain was who was a geologist and was the first president of the University of Wisconsin who was a natural scientist, became president, and he was president this very key era from 1887 to 1892, and a lot of things blossomed at the university in the nature of research, which he gets a lot of credit for, and also in extension and public engagement, which he doesn't get much credit for. Now, if you've been to the university and you've ever gone to the Babcock Dairy Store, you've probably seen both these things. In 1890, Stephen Babcock announced the development of his Babcock butterfat test. This was a huge advance for dairy farmers in Wisconsin, and it allowed dairy farmers to measure the butterfat in their milk. It meant that they were disincentivized from skimming off their milk and then presenting it to the cheesemakers or the creameries as if it was full fat milk, because they couldn't do that anymore. And it presented this challenge. You've got this great new test. How do you get? So one of the things the university did was to set up Well, we have never had technical difficulties before. So the Babcock milk butterfat test presented a challenge to the university and to the farming community. How do you get thousands of people to figure out how to use this? And so this is one of the first really key examples of technology transfer in Wisconsin that we can look to as a case study of large distribution. One of the things the university did was to set up the dairy school in 1890. In 1893, the bovine tuberculosis test in dairy cows came out with Professor Russell, who's founder of the bacteriology department, among others. And this was another one example of how do you train people and where, and can you do it on campus? Can you do it in communities across the state? And these set some pretty good sounding themes in my mind of one aspect of sharing science and doing science outreach. In 1898, the dairy barn was built. And one of the cool things about the dairy barn, and you can come and visit this barn if you'd like, it's still standing on campus. It is a national astonishing. It's one of the cradles of discovery of vitamins. But here's a picture of Dean Russell at the, demonstrating this test for tuberculosis. In the original arena, this was the stock pavilion before the 1908 stock pavilion was built. And it's got skylights up here, and here they're testing this. The cool thing is they'd show people how to use this, and if the cow tested positive, they'd slaughter the cow and then do an autopsy and to confirm or refute whether the cow actually had tuberculosis, bovine tuberculosis. So this is another one of these touched points of examples of doing science outreach early in the research era of the university. We've heard about the Northwest Ordinance for funding, the original university, the Morrill Land Grant of 1862, that law for starting the funding for the College of Agriculture, 1887, and the Hatch Act for helping to fund agriculture research year after year after year with cash. There's also the 1906 Adams Act, which isn't as famous, but the key thing is Representative Adams is from Wisconsin, and this is a follow-on to the Hatch Act, and emphasized that it was good, actually expected to do basic research in agriculture. In 1912, Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin hired its first ag county agent, and that was in Oneida County, and Rhinelander is this county seat of Oneida County. And then in 1914, the federal Smith-Lever Act went into effect, and that provides annual federal funding for agriculture extension. And agriculture extension has grown to encompass cooperative extension, and that includes what I still call family living agents, 4-H, youth development agents, agriculture agents, and community and natural resource develop agents. The key thing here is by 1914, we can note that the university had federal authorization and funding for the 3 canonical missions of today's public land grant university: instruction, research, and extension. And note that the Morrill Act funds were excluded from paying for buildings. So part of these fundings is to always ask, how are you going to pay for the programs? How are you going to pay for the venues or the places? Because I think it takes people, places, and programs in order to do good outreach and good engagement with the public. So venue. Venue is this great Latin word which means to come, as in avenir was the time to come. A venue, avenue, all has to do with a place to come, to visit, to learn, to engage. So the thing that I like about this, let's say it's 1910, here's the current College of Agriculture building. Here's Hiram Smith Hall, here's King Hall, and here's the heating plant. The other thing that isn't mentioned in the cut line is this. This is the ag experiment plots. This is where people could come and stand up on this little hill and look over at the plots and see how the plots were designed, not as demonstration plots solely, but as experimental plots, so that you could get fair side-by-side comparisons. I think this is one of the most impressive uses of open space on campus ever. And most of these are now moved to the system of ag experiment stations, ag research stations around the state. But at one time, one of the reasons to come to the campus of the Public Land Grant Research University was to be able to check out these experimental plots. In higher education funding, there's this famous line made famous by a president of Harvard a century ago, more than a century ago, and that is every tub on its own bottom. And that means when you look at a large, complex organization in higher education, such as universities 150 years ago or today, every college, every school, maybe every department, maybe every investigator has to be able to provide their own funding. So if that's the approach that we take, you can have federal funding or state funding. That funding from the federal or the state could be annual appropriations. It could be competitive funding. It could be gifts and grants. It could be contracts. It could be fees for service. All these things are possible, but how you fund affects your culture and your expectations and your performance of who you serve, who you don't serve. And so the funding question is always fundamental. So the cooperative extension folks in all 50 states are common. It's one of the reasons it's called cooperative is because the funding is cooperative. It's federal, state, and county based. And this again includes the Wisconsin 4-H, which are the people that Liz and I work for. And again, that's the statewide youth development program of UW-Madison. National Science Foundation has a broader impacts funding. It's actually a criterion along with intellectual merit. But in the last 27, 28 years, the National Science Foundation, when you put in a grant proposal to NSF, they have two expectations: intellectual merit and broader impacts. Not limited to kinds of public extension and communication and engagement. It could be other things than this. Many people that Liz and I and our science outreach colleagues work with get their money both in part from National Science Foundation funding supporting broader impacts. Mentioned before, the fee for service possibility is a real one, and for many programs, it's always been their major source, especially for summer camps and similar. For those of us in cooperative extension, we have to worry about issues of access, affordability, and the cost to process many small amounts of. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Glad you figured that out. I wouldn't have thought of that. Thank you. Okay. And one of the things about universities, especially large universities, is these are very competitive places. We compete with other universities. We compete within the university. We also collaborate with each other, but there's only so much money out there and so many funders. And so you have to be able to go out how you're going to fund your operation is in part or in full through gifts and endowments. Where you stand on the priority list of the institution, whether it's the university, the college, the department, can affect your likelihood of success and access to funders and donors. One of the things that I think is important for me at least, is this line, this phrase: we value what we measure and we measure what we value. And this is in part because not everything that's valuable is measurable, and that's a conundrum. And everything we value is not necessarily measurable, and so we want to be data driven, but being able to find ways to datify characters that aren't easily measured is a big deal, especially in an area like outreach, where it's often many of our most valuable things are actually in relationships, and those are pretty hard to tap into to measure. One of the great things here is we at UW-Madison every year in April, the Data Digest comes out. If you'd like to know more about your public land grant research and extension university, this is a great way to get a data-driven viewpoint. The National Science Foundation collects all kinds of data. One kind of data it collects is the HERD survey every year. HERD stands for Higher Education Research and Development. And so I'm going to look first at the Data Digest, selected things from the Data Digest, which is about 180 pages long, and the National Science Foundation HERD, which is about 50 tables. So first of all, if you go there to the Data Digest, in one page, you can get a really good grasp of your university if you're here at UW-Madison. Hopefully there are things like this at every major research university so that you can go in there and say, okay, how many people go to school here? How many FTEs are we? So the impressive thing about all these is we have a head count for enrollment, freshmen. We've got total living alumni of 468,000. That's an amazing resource for doing science outreach. We talk about degrees awarded, tuition and fees, cost of attendance. So those are all part of the instruction mission of the university. Then we spend a good chunk of time on research expenditures, especially the NSF higher education research and development tables that I'm going to go through in detail. And then we look more at budget and faculty and inventory of land acres. So of the three missions, which one isn't called out in our Data Digest? The overarching public service one, and that would include science outreach. So when it comes to the future science outreach, one of the things I think we need to do is to figure out how are we going to datify what we do, even though we acknowledge that much of what we do can't be easily reduced to data. Here's the table of contents. Again, this is to draw out one. I really am a fan of the Data Digest, but two, as an outreacher, I don't see me here. I don't see my colleagues here. I don't see the mission of outreach here. And there is the mission of instruction, and there is the mission of research. To give you an idea of, if you're a researcher and you're thinking, how am I going to be able to do this, and who's going to help pay for my outreach? Oftentimes research will, in the case of NSF, they expect broader impacts, and oftentimes the way you can achieve broader impacts is to do public outreach. So check out this table sometime. It gives you an idea of, here are all the colleges and schools and their relative amounts. So the School of Medicine and Public Health is $523 million. The graduate school, Vice Chancellor for Graduate Research and Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education is $223 million. College of Engineering is 107. The College of Agriculture is 103. I forgot the College of Letters and Science. I'm scanning this. It's the third largest, excuse me, at 157 million. the weight, the heaviness, the distribution of dollars in research at universities has shifted over the last 35 years tremendously towards schools of medicine and public health, in part because the National Institutes for Health had their budget doubled and redoubled. And we'll see that in a second here. So at Wisconsin, this is the total research awards and where they go to. And you can see the School of Medicine and Public Health is the largest, letters and science, or excuse me, grad school, letters and science, engineering and CALS. And where does this money come from? Where does the federal money come from? Health and Human Services, 56%, NSF, 14%, energy, 11%. So this distribution will change over time, and the university will adapt to these changes as it has over the last decades as this pie has changed. Budget by programs. One of the reasons I wanted to include this table is this is one of the mentions, one of the few times that public service is mentioned here. And you'll see across here 70 million, 75 million, 80 million, whoa, 145 million, 159 million. What happened here is from 2018-19 to 2019-20, two entities of the former UW Extension were merged back into UW-Madison. One is the Division of Public Broadcasting, and the other was the Division of Extension. Those two things started out at the University of Wisconsin, back when it was the University of Wisconsin. And then in 1965, when we became UW-Madison, a separate UW-Extension was set up. That UW-Extension was dissolved starting in 2017, and several of the units were returned to UW-Madison. So that's a big deal. If I were to give this talk 7 years ago, I would be focusing on what that means for science outreach, having Extension be back part of UW-Madison and public broadcasting. Now, here's the NSF money, and what this is universities ranked. So if you'd like to know how your basketball team is ranked, you can look up the AP polls. If you want to know how your football team is ranked, you can look up the AP polls. If you want to know how your university is ranked for research, you can look up a lot of different rankings and stuff. This one is not a beauty contest. This one is by R&D. So this isn't necessarily quality, this is quantity. But one of the impressive things is this university is ranked 8th in the country at about $1.39 billion a year in research. This scope and scale is important to know because this is one of the great places that I'm aware of to do science outreach. And one of the reasons it's a great place to do science outreach is because of the scope and scale of the research here. But all these universities, and there are more than 50 universities in this country that do $100 million or more a year in research. There's a lot of opportunities for researchers to do that. Why should they? Well, one of the foremost reasons is there's $89.7 billion done in R&D in all the U.S. research universities in this fiscal year of 2021. Of that 89.7 million, how much comes from the federal government? 49 billion. How much comes from state and local government? 4.7. So well over half of all the money that comes in for doing research at universities, public or private, comes from federal and state taxpayers. So not a small thing to keep in mind as to why you would want to do science outreach. Our number one funder is the public. And then here's the ranking of universities, not overall R&D budget, but by federal agencies and how much the university gets from federal agencies. And what you see is while we are 8th overall from federal stuff, we are down here at 16. So there's some opportunity for growth there, and that's one of the challenges at any university is how do you compete better and better for the federal funds, because the federal funds are the largest source of funds. And then this gives us an idea of which agencies come in first place. HHS, Health and Human Services. These are too small. I'll just read them for you so that you can get an idea. Health and Human Services, Department of Defense, NASA, NSF, NASA, and USDA. So those are things to keep in mind. Of those agencies, the two that I'm most familiar with are the USDA, and they have this cooperative extension mission as part of the USDA. And then there's NSF with their broader impacts criterion for funding grant proposals. Now this is back to the UW-Madison Data Digest, and now we're talking again about venues, places. We got to have people, places, and programs. Where can we welcome people to campus? And that's important because hospitality is reciprocal. And if we as outreachers at a public university hope to be welcomed into communities all over the state in all 72 counties, we in turn probably need to welcome them to our place because hospitality is reciprocal. If you are always going over to your friend's house, but you never invite them back over to your house, I don't know how much longer you're going to be friends. So the capacity to be able to welcome people to campus as well as to travel to communities, to engage people in their homes, to welcome them here to our campus is a big deal. The key thing about this is when you look at the new things that have come up in the last 20 years, there's a renovation for the education building, there's the Chazen Museum of Art, the new music building, the beautiful addition of the School of Human Ecology, Union South, Memorial Union. In next year's Data Digest, there probably include the new Meat Science and Animal Biologics Discovery Building, which is a wonderful, wonderful venue for sharing science with the public, and they do a fantastic job. But one of the things we do not yet have on this campus, owned by the university, is a venue for sharing science with the public every day in an organized way. Many universities don't have that. But many of our competitors do. The University of Washington in Seattle, the University of California in San Diego, the University of California in Berkeley, the University of North Carolina. These are places, the University of Minnesota with the Bell Museum. These are places that have invested in large venues, basically science museums or science centers that are open pretty much every day so that they can welcome people every day in an organized way to come experience science. And one of the key things about why science outreach, the irony of science outreach is reciprocal, being able to do it on campus, is we have this most extraordinary resource called people. If you go to most science museums, you will find there often that they have really cool interactive science exhibits, and that's great. But if you come to a research university, this one or any of the other many research universities, what we have that's really amazing is interactive scientists. It's great to have interactive science exhibits. It's even more splendid to have interactive scientists. So where do we have for a place to interact with those? That's what we're looking at for the part of the future of science outreach. So the scope of outreach here, science outreach at UW, there's the Division of Continuing Studies, which is distinct from the Division of Extension. You can lead or take a course in science as part of your lifelong learning. The Division of Extension, which is who I work for in addition to the Biotech Center. They have offices in all 72 counties. The Division of Public Broadcasting, PBS Wisconsin for television, Wisconsin Public Radio for radio. And I'm delighted to point out every chance I can that broadcast radio in Wisconsin began in the Department of Physics here in 1916, 1917, 1918. Wisconsin WHA is considered one of the oldest, if not the oldest station in the nation. This all came out of applied research out of the physics department 105 years ago. Still vibrant, still essential, still at the core of connecting people to the resources of their public university. The university has the University Communications, which includes the website news.wisc.edu. So if you're a researcher and you would like to share your science with other folks, that's one angle that you can take. Almost every college and school has similar things. So for example, here's the Wisconsin Alumni Association magazine. The WAA is an affiliate of the university, but the stories in here are all about folks, researchers and scholars in all fields. And then here's College of Letters and Science, and the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences has GROW. As far as I know, many of the schools have magazines like that, and they're still printed on paper because they go to people my age who like to read things. And that's one way that you not only communicate, but you also connect and develop relationships, because that's one way you can develop donors. Campus and Visitor Relations Office is a big deal because they help welcome that are in 6th grade or older to come to campus for field trips. And Liz and I get to work with them, especially for large groups that need to have several sites on campus, because we don't have a place that can accommodate much more than 25 or 30 people at a time. We have to do round robins at 3 or 4 different sites in order to accommodate a class of a group of students of 75 or 100. And then if you're a researcher who would like to give talks to the public, there's Badger Talks. I'm guessing almost every university has a speakers bureau. Ours is called Badger Talks, and you can just go there. You can volunteer. They'll probably review and see what kind of research you're doing and what kind of speaker you are. But that's a very powerful angle to be able to connect with people in person. Great thing to me about Badger Talks is they help be your agent. They will help you find people who would like to hear about your story all across Wisconsin, and they will also help pay for your travel expense. In addition to all these parts, all these schools and colleges and resources that are officially part of UW-Madison, we have affiliates that are not officially part of UW-Madison, but collaborate closely with the university. These include UW Foundation and the UW Alumni Association. The Alumni Association organizes Grandparents University, which is one of the great science outreach opportunities on campus every July. The Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, in addition to funding research, also funds the the Discovery Building across the street. And their town center there is a large public destination on campus, but it is owned and operated by WRF. The Morgridge Institute for Research is also primarily in the building, Discovery across the street, and they have an extensive program of community outreach, and they're happy to welcome folks from UW-Madison to be part of those. And then UW Hospitals and Clinics. The hospitals and clinics were originally part of the university dating back to about 1924, but in 1995 they were split off and they're under the control of a separate public authority. So people, places, and programs, where can you find out about these? One of the fastest ways to do it is either go online or get one of these paper versions of this guide and map. And the great thing about this is it can go right, oh, sorry about that. Let's see if this will open up. So that's the newest version. And it's got a welcome from, uh-oh, I'm being challenged here, Liz. It's got a welcome from the new chancellor and a land acknowledgement. This is about visitors not necessarily geared for prospective students. This thing has been coming out for close to 15 years. And it's one of the things that most impresses me about it is that it's for everyone, not just for prospective students. Here's some popular destinations. And then we start getting into the sciencey stuff. So there's museums and galleries, which are both fine and performing arts, as well as museums and from the science fields. And then science and discovery. So the Discovery Building across the street, the Dairy Cattle Center, Space Place, the Washburn Observatory, which was opened in 1881, one of the oldest examples of both research and outreach on campus. All right. I have to put my glasses on so I can read that. Holy cow, there it is, the Biotech Center right here, the Wisconsin National Primate Research Center, the Energy Institute, Wednesday night at the lab, which is done here every Wednesday night, 50 times a year. And that's just a flavoring. There's actually more, and we'll go through where you can find out more about each one of those. So if you're at a large research university, you are likely to have lots and lots of boutique science venues where you can share your science and have a place to welcome people. All right. There's also places off campus. And before I go any further, I also want to mention the Lakeshore Nature Preserve. Of the 930 acres on this campus, about 320 of them or so are dedicated to the Lakeshore Nature Preserve. This is a great place to come and just enjoy nature, the lake shore, picnic point. It is some of the most distinguishing parts of being on this gorgeous campus. The Ag Research Stations and the Arboretum are two examples of places not right here on campus that are big venues for welcoming large numbers of people year-round. Back on campus is the Ingersoll Physics Museum since 1917. We're back to physics again. Physics helped launch the oldest station in the nation. And from my point of view, when they launched the Ingersoll Physics Museum, that was the first hands-on science center, hands-on science museum in the United States that we're aware of so far. And Liz and I like to use Cheryl Redmond's term of calling these things exploration stations. And so I think the Physics Museum also has a claim to being able to say they're the oldest exploration station in the nation. And then a more thorough list of all the places on campus that make up this wonderful science constellation here are these venues: Allen Gardens, the Textile Collection, Allen Textile Collection, the Arboretum, Babcock Hall Dairy Store, the BioTrek Outreach Program here, the Botanical Garden and Greenhouse, the Ag Research Stations, the Dairy Cattle Center. 82 cows live on campus. They get milked every day. You can go visit them. DC Smith Greenhouse, the Ebling Library down at the School of Medicine on the far west side. Forest Products Lab is a federal facility. Already mentioned the Geology Museum, the Ingersoll Physics Museum, the Insect Research Collection by appointment. Mentioned the Lakeshore Nature Preserve and the Morgridge Institute for Research. The Curie Lab runs an leaf cutter ant exhibit over in the microbe place in the Microbial Sciences building. NOR Turfgrass, the Primate Center, Davis Design Gallery, Space Place, 2300 South Park Street, Steenbach Library, Town Center, the Wasteman Center. The Wasteman Center does lots and lots of publicly engaged research. The Washburn Observatory, the Ag Research Stations, the Energy Institute, the Institute for Discovery, the State Herbarium, and the Zoology Museum. So these are splendid boutique venues. As a researcher, you can collaborate with those places. And then the final thing is going over time, starting this time of year. Here's the annual cycle of science outreach events on campus. Darwin Days is coming up. It'll be February 8th and 9th this year. It's always around Darwin's birthday, which is February 12th. The Wonders of Physics will be that weekend and the following weekend. Their 40th annual, 41st annual. Been going on a long time. That's Professor Clint Sprott's Wonders of Physics. The Arboretum Research Symposium in March, the UW Science Expeditions Open House, which will be April 14th, 15th, and 16th, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That'll be our 21st year of doing that. Engineering Expo the following weekend. Earth Day, always around April 21st, 22nd. UW Family Gardening Day on May 6th, Saturday, May 6th this year. Grandparents University, the last 3 Thursdays and Fridays in July on campus. The Native Gardening Conference, I think that's in September. And then the Wisconsin Science Festival. I don't have the dates for the 2023 version, but I think it's in mid-October. So this is an extraordinary place to be able to share science. It's a big, diverse, wide-ranging place. It has a long history and commitment in doing science with the public, both here on campus and across the state. That's part of what the Wisconsin idea is. One of the key things is that this is where people can come and hone their science savvy. They can come and hone their science savvy because they get to experience science not as all the stuff that we already know, but as stuff we don't know yet. And that's one of the cool things about researchers is that the researchers view science as not just what we know, but it's figuring out stuff that nobody knows yet. And so to be able to come and experience science is exploring the unknown by working with researchers and outreachers. That makes university campuses anywhere, and especially this one, a great place to be able to do science outreach. The future, as Yogi Berra said, is hard to make predictions about. And he said it more elegantly. He said it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. For me, there have been several things that have bowled over outreach and the PDF. Another was the invention of the phone as we know it today since 2007 and the iPhone. Third one was the Great Recession and the financial strains that placed on the university. And we got to see just how how high or how lower priority public engagement was or was not for the university. And the last two are the pandemic and the attempted coup. And I think those are things that have raised questions about what is the nature of science outreach? How do we go about it when the pandemic in particular is a challenge to science outreach in that how much time are we going to spend on the biology, how much time we're going to spend on the sociology, the communication, the politics and the political science what's persuasive, what's our role in persuading or not persuading people. And I think that's things that are really going to affect overall how we view science outreach in specific, how we fund it and where we do it, and with whom. Bryn, you've been very kind to hold your question. Do you want to go ahead and ask that now?
One of the things I've been seeing as a person getting into research is that research has been getting, it seems to be getting more and more specialized to where people need a higher degree of education in order to understand what the current advances in research are. And I wanted to know your perspective on maybe potential challenges that would cause to the future of public science outreach.
One of the, Liz, could everybody hear? Good. The complexity issue is a big one, and I don't know necessarily how to deal with it, because for many, you got to bring them along, rule even through the basics. So when Liz and I are doing programs, we often have not much more than an hour to figure a better job of conveying complex science. I think that's why having this whole range of, so 25, 30-year-old website technology, 15-year-old YouTube and social technology, being able to value science communication in all researchers so that they can tell their stories at many different levels of complexity, making sure they have venues like Wednesday night at the lab or the science series is at Discovery. It's really hard, and I can say that as a biotech outreacher. If I'm sitting in a chair here watching somebody artificial intelligence or bioinformatics, I'm having a very hard time following it. So part of that is even having the researchers help people like Liz and me, whose job is to share science, carving out time to do that, and then finding places where and opportunities where that's appropriate for what the folks want to learn. I have a job because of the boat controversy back in 1989, 1990. And that was considered very technical, wide-ranging. It was social and economic as well as biotechnical. It was how do people perceive science? Whom do they trust? And I don't think it's gotten any simpler since. I've gotten older and have seen more and more examples of what you're pointing out. So one of the things is, for example, here we have a Department of Life Science Communication. We have a School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Both of those places are helping to train not only research into these questions as a research base, but also are training new scientists who aren't going to go do research, but who are going to be practitioners. I don't know what to tell you about the media. It's really to do a well-developed YouTube series. And so far we haven't had, well, if you can tell me which ones at this university are really well series, let me know. Mine is not. And that's because we're doing it on 1.5 FTEs. So thank you for asking that question and letting me run across the field, because it's a very big question and a hard thing to nail down. One of the reasons I spend a lot of time on venue is because I think venue, A campus is still a field. That's what it means in Latin. And camp can have a competitive advantage in that we can welcome people here. And that extraordinary opportunity. However, how many people can come and how many days can they come? That's why being able to do things on here has always been part of that. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.